Okay, so in this lecture we're going to start by looking at some various ways in which the food supply is altered. In many cases it's to help make the food supply safer. In other cases it's to help prolong shelf life. In other ways you'll see it's to enhance flavoring, prohibit spoilage, etc. And we're going to start out with pasteurization. Pasteurization is the process of heating foods to a certain temperature in order to destroy the potentially harmful pathogens. Okay, so it's a safety mechanism. You can look online and read all sorts of conspiracy theories about how pasteurization affects the nutritional content of foods. That simply is not true. Okay, pasteurizing food only alters the food in such a way that it kills the potentially harmful pathogens. There are two primary types of pasteurization utilized in the U.S., although there are many more types than this. The first one is called HTST, which stands for high temperature short time. This is how the majority of, for example, the milk in your conventional grocery store would be pasteurized. The milk would be heated to 161.5 degrees Fahrenheit, held for 15 seconds, and then brought back down to the appropriate temperature, which is below 40 degrees. The other type of pasteurization process that's used in the U.S. is called UHT, ultra high temperature. You don't see this used as frequently. You tend to see it more in Europe. If you've traveled to Europe or other countries and you've seen boxed milk that sits on the shelf, okay, that's pasteurized under the UHT process. It's actually shelf stable until you open it. Once you open it, though, you do need to refrigerate it. Where you tend to see UHT pasteurization in the U.S. is if you read very closely those little creamer kind of shots that you see at coffee places, sometimes you'll notice that they're not refrigerated. You might freak out and think, oh my gosh, my creamer's not on ice, it's going to be bad. If you read closely, a lot of times it will say UHT, no refrigeration required until opened. Okay, and that's been pasteurized under the UHT method. So again, pasteurization is simply a safety mechanism to ensure that the harmful pathogens are killed. It's used primarily for milks and juices. The opposite of pasteurized is what we refer to as raw, so raw milk or raw juices. Another way in which our food supply is altered is using the process of irradiation. Irradiation exposes food to controlled doses of gamma rays, which have radioactive cobalt-60. Okay? And the rays pass through the living cells and disrupt the internal DNA, protein, and other structures, which inhibits their growth. Okay? So it's used primarily as a food preservation method. You can see the picture of the two different types of strawberries there. One basket that has been irradiated, one basket that hasn't. Okay? This is an extremely safe process. Any concerns about safety are largely unfounded. Irradiation has been used globally for over 50 years. Okay, currently more than 40 countries in the U.S. regularly employ irradiation. If a product has been irradiated, it's supposed to be identified as such with that logo on the bottom, which is called the Radura logo. That's R-A-D-U-R-A. In the U.S., we sometimes see irradiation applied most regularly to spices. Your spices would all become rancid and go bad if they were not irradiated. Spices and teas are generally irradiated, okay? But also it's used on products like potatoes and onions to prevent sprouting, certain fruits like strawberries and mangoes. Irradiation you sometimes also hear referred to as cold pasteurization. It's kind of a euphemism that's gaining in popularity because there's this whole subset of people who mistakenly believe that there's something wrong with pasteurization. So you see food and particularly pressed juice companies now promoting their cold pasteurization methods. Okay? People don't like the word irradiation. It kind of conjures up images of danger and radiation. It's certainly safe. Calling it cold pasteurization, it's just another mechanism to inhibit growth of undesirable organisms. Pesticides. Pesticides are chemicals that are oftentimes applied in conventional agriculture. Okay, so conventional is kind of the opposite of organic. If we're going to compare conventional and organic, which we will today, conventional is non-organic, traditional farming practices, which in the United States more often than not involves pretty heavy pesticide use. They're chemicals that are applied to crops in order to control insects, diseases, and weeds. Now there is also residual that's left over. We'll see which government agencies are responsible for controlling that. And they've determined at super low levels it's supposed to not be harmful to your health. Although many people prefer or would like to not have any pesticide residues in their food. And buying organic is the only way to assure that you're not getting pesticides. And we'll go through the list of the attributes of organics But the first one is, one of the benefits is that it's essentially pesticide-free. Now, there's nothing to say if you had a conventional plot right next to an organic plot, there might not be some cross-contamination. There's always the potential for a little bit of pesticide residue in your organic foods, but it's going to be significantly less than if you're buying conventionally produced produce. Imported foods also tend to have a higher pesticide content. It's not just fruits and vegetables, though, that harbor pesticides. Pesticides are found throughout our food supply, and they tend to be compounded in certain processed foods. Okay, so you sometimes think, oh, it's just fruits and vegetables. If I don't eat any fruits and vegetables, I'll stay away from pesticides, and that's not the case, because the majority of all animal foods have eaten some of those plant foods along the food chain. And this is an image from the Concepts and Controversies text. The red dots there are representing pesticide residue left on food. You can notice that most of the pesticides follow the fats in the food. Okay, washing and peeling helps to reduce pesticide content. I'll show you some other ways to reduce pesticide residue levels in your foods. But note that even through the animal chain and with the fats, we eat a lot of fat, we eat a lot of animal fat, those pesticide concentrations increase. So even if you're eating highly processed, high-fat foods, you still run the potential to get pesticides. What's the only way to not get pesticides? Well, eat organic foods. There's whole lines of organic junk foods, okay? Organic processed foods and packaged foods. They're no more nutritious for you, but they are better for you with regards to the sense that they would have lower pesticide levels. The Environmental Protection Agency is the government agency that's tasked most readily with monitoring pesticides. Mentioned in the previous food safety lecture that the EPA is in charge of two things: monitoring pesticides and monitoring water. They do lots of other things, but for food safety, they do two things. They monitor pesticides and they monitor the safety of your water. So the EPA approves and registers which pesticides can be used in foods. Keep in mind that that's different than what other countries say. Okay, we tend to actually have more stringent environmental guidelines with regards to pesticides than many other developing countries do. But we eat a lot of fruits and vegetables from developing countries that have less stringent pesticide regulations. The EPA also established tolerance levels, so you can't use more than X amount of parts per million on however many cubic acres. They also established maximum amounts of pesticide residues that may remain in the food. And we'll talk more about that when we look at organic, which are the foods that we should buy organic and the ones that we could buy conventional and not have to be as worried about pesticides. The FDA and the USDA, to some degree, a very small amount, does monitor pesticide residues in food, but to be honest, the majority of the responsibility for pesticides falls under the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay. The EPA has decided at certain levels for adults who are healthy, these X, Y, or Z levels of pesticides shouldn't pose any harm for you. However, there's a different discussion when we're talking about children. Children are uniquely vulnerable to pesticides. So as a result, many parents are concerned about and are interested in limiting the amount of pesticide residue in children for the following reasons. For the first reason, kids have an immature detoxification system. Okay, so these pesticides, which are essentially poisons, tend to stay in their body for longer. Secondly, children have developing brains, which are more penetrable than adult brains are, and they can't fully exclude the pesticides. Thirdly, children's bodies are smaller in size than adults. They also eat proportionately more food per pound of body weight, so they encounter more pesticide per pound of body weight than do adults. So if you're interested in reducing pesticide residue intake, here are a few tips for what can be done, in addition to buying only organic foods, which is probably not realistic for most people. So some other things that can be done is to, for example, trim the fat from your meats. Pesticide concentrations tend to be concentrated in animal fats and other fats in the foods. With regards to your produce, you always want to wash your fruits and vegetables under cold running water with friction. You do not need to buy any special produce washes. Those don't do anything beyond what you can do with your hands in running water. For fruits like oranges and grapefruits, don't bite into them to start the peeling process. Biting into the pesticides, use a knife, and try not to cross-contaminate whatever was on the flesh or with what was on the skin with what's on the flesh. When it comes to waxed fruits and vegetables, it's a good idea to peel that wax off because the wax kind of seals in the pesticide concentrations. And for vegetables like carrots, or fruits like apples, you'll see momentarily that apples are repeatedly, studies show that they have the highest pesticide concentration of all conventionally produced produce. Especially with apples, if you're really concerned for your kids, peel the apples. Yeah, you lose a gram or two of fiber, but you're also peeling off the pesticide levels. At the end of the day, choosing organic fruits and vegetables is truly the best way to limit the amount of pesticides in your foods. Another area of concern with regards to alteration of our food supply is with growth hormones. And growth hormone tends to be a controversy that surrounds our milk products, in addition to our meats. There are two primarily used synthetic hormones, genetically engineered synthetic hormones, that are used in the conventional dairy cow, RBGH and RBST. Now, organic manufacturing standards say that you cannot put hormones in organic milk. The U.S. government agencies have said, oh, small amounts of these hormones are perfectly safe. There's a lot of people, especially parents, who think, I don't want a whole bunch of synthetic hormones in my kids. How can you assure that you're not getting synthetic hormones in your kids? You could buy them organic milk, or now, increasingly, we're seeing conventional milk that has a sticker on it that says growth hormone free. 5 or 10 years ago, if you went into the store, the only way to know you were getting growth hormone free milk was to buy organic. Because there's no law that says if you're using one of those two synthetic hormones that you have to disclose that. You just had to be knowledgeable enough as a consumer to know, shoot, if this is not organic, that means there's growth hormone in it. Now there's been a much more increased focus on growth hormones. A lot of parents very vocally saying they don't want that stuff. Not just parents, everyone. They don't want growth hormones in their milk. So you're actually seeing conventional dairy operations now saying, well, if I want to keep selling non-organic milk, I got to find a way to make sure it's growth hormone free. So now many conventional dairy operations, you'll notice even on the generic brands of the cheap milk you see at the store, it will say growth hormone free. Kind of along the same lines, but actually a different discussion is with regards to antibiotics in livestock. Okay, you know that cows are supposed to eat corn. Sorry, cows are supposed to eat grass, but instead they eat corn. The corn causes infections. Okay, the infections, you can't sell an infectious cow for slaughter. So across the board, traditional cattle operations prophylactically give antibiotics. Now the concern here is not antibiotics getting into your system and now you're eating a cow's antibiotics. The concern is widespread prolific use of antibiotics causes antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria like E. coli 0157H7. The only way to assure you're getting antibiotic-free meat is to buy organic meat. And again, the cattle need the antibiotics because they're being fed a product like corn, which they're not physiologically designed to digest. Okay, their stomachs aren't really equipped to design that efficiently, and as a byproduct, they produce a lot of bacteria that cause a lot of infections. Did you have a question?
Yeah. What's so bad about growth hormone?
So the question is, what's so bad about growth hormone? Now, the government would tell you it's totally safe in small amounts. There's some speculation that if we look at the decrease in the age of menarche, which is the onset of the first menstrual period, if you look historically, recently, girls are starting to start their periods much earlier than they used to. Age 9, 10, 11. It was always 14, 15, 16. There's some people, it's not proven, but there's some suspicion that perhaps the high levels of growth hormones in the milk, we encourage our kids to drink 3 cups of milk a day. It's a lot of growth hormone. That might be leading to it. There's just also the concern that it's a genetically engineered synthetic hormone. It's not a natural product being put into a product really without you knowing that's supposed to be perceived as being healthy, which is milk. So a lot of it is ethical. There might be some physiological sides to it. According to the government, there's nothing wrong with it. The dairy industry really doesn't like those growth hormone-free stickers because they're saying, listen, there's nothing wrong with this growth hormone. Why should we have to put the sticker on? They don't have to put the sticker on. Consumers want them to put the sticker on because consumers are starting to realize, wait a minute, this stuff's in my milk. I'm not going to buy products unless I know what's in there. So now they're actually voluntarily putting the sticker on, which is kind of cool. It's one of the few instances where you've seen consumer demand push labeling as opposed to the government.
Well, why do they want to add it so badly?
Why would you want to add growth hormone to your cows? What does it make it do?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, they put it, I didn't mean to confuse it. They give the growth hormone to the cows, which makes them produce a lot more milk, which means you can sell a lot more milk. With the antibiotics, They feed them a bunch of corn, because corn is a big fat starch kernel, right? Lots of calories. That fattens your cow up really quickly. You can sell it, it can go to slaughter a lot more quickly. If you're interested in some of these concepts, a really good article to read is by Michael Pollan. It's called This Steer's Life. Okay, it's one of the first kind of food politics essays that he wrote. It was in the New York Times a long time ago now. It's on his website, michaelpollan.com. But it's very interesting because he buys a young calf and follows it through the food chain to slaughter, and basically shows what extremely thin margins there are in the cattle industry in the U.S. We want lots of beef in this country, and we don't want to pay anything for it. So of course it makes sense that we're feeding corn to get them fatter faster. We're doing widespread antibiotics so that we can kill them faster. It kind of talks a lot about these political inputs and how we got to this really unusual situation that is very far removed from which is how cows were originally designed to eat and digest nutrients. With regards to toxins in our food, okay, the primary toxin, and your text talks about this as well, that we're concerned about is methylmercury in fish. Okay, now for the most part, before I introduce this topic, because I don't want to kind of engage in any fear-mongering, you are probably not at risk for methylmercury poisoning from fish. Okay? The majority of the fish that we eat in this country is from farmed operations with highly controlled feeding protocols. They're not going to let any mercury into your farmed fish. You may disagree with fish farming from an ethical standpoint, an environmental standpoint, that's fine, but you cannot argue the fact that farmed fish operations have very, very low rates of methylmercury poisoning. Now, if you're out deep sea fishing in an area known to have high concentrations of methylmercury poisoning, different story. Okay? This image is showing you bioaccumulation in the food chain. Plants and plankton, which are at the bottom of the food chain, they become contaminated with methylmercury, for example, from industrial runoff. As we move up the food chain, you have level 2. Okay? You've got plankton eating fish. Those fish eat the plankton and the plants with their methylmercury, and they bioaccumulate that. And then in step 3, as the bigger fish eat the smaller fish, would eat the plants, they're eating, as they're higher up on the food chain, more and more mercury. The greatest, or the most well-known methylmercury disaster was in Minamata, Japan. Okay, and this is how we know of a very unfortunate case study, the devastating effects of high levels of methylmercury in the human body. Okay, there was a large industrial accident. Huge levels of methylmercury got into the local water supply. The people fished. They ate the fish, caused awful neurological disorders. You can see videos on YouTube. I tried to find one for class that wasn't extremely upsetting. It's almost impossible. It causes Parkinson's-like seizures to the point where people can't eat, drink, take care of themselves. That's from very, very high levels of mercury. You and I eating even a couple of freshwater fish, or saltwater fish that you caught yourself, even if they're high up on the food chain, you're probably not going to be at that high of risk. The exception is with pregnant women, okay, because methylmercury can cause spontaneous abortion, okay? It can cause brain damage, lots of problems in the developing fetus. And that's why the U.S. government has established fish safety guidelines for pregnant women. Okay, so pregnant women need to limit their fish intake to 12 ounces of fish a week. And of that 12 ounces, no more than 6 should be tuna. Okay, so they usually tell pregnant women, avoid the large fish that you see on the slide. Okay, swordfish, shark, kingfish, tilefish, mackerel. Okay, those aren't fish we eat a ton of traditionally, at least in the United States. However, the bigger fish, the higher up on the food chain, the higher chance of methylmercury intoxication. Of the 12 ounces of fish that you can have a week, because we want pregnant women to eat some fish for those omega-3s, right? The EPA plus the DHA that helps the fetus's brain development. Some fish is good, but too much may be problematic because it crosses the placental barrier that mercury does. For the rest of everyone who's not pregnant, the benefits of eating fish far outweigh any of the potential dangers that you might encounter from methylmercury. Okay, it's for the non-pregnant population, it's really not a big public health concern in the U.S. The last part here is just about a couple of other food additives you might have heard about. You can wonder why they're in your foods. The FDA has regulated and approved over 3,000 additives to be put in our food, most of which is to stop mold and bacterial growth. Why would you go add other things to food besides food? Well, because Americans want really super cheap packaged and processed foods. And the way you package and process food so they can stay on the shelf for a long time and you can make a lot of money has to do with preserving. Okay? There's a list called the GRAS list, and GRAS stands for Generally Recognized as Safe. The FDA controls the GRAS list, and what it basically is kind of interesting. You can look up online and read GRAS ingredients. There's all sorts of weird threshold amounts of stuff that's allowed to be in your food, and they basically said, listen, over the last couple decades, these things have been in your food, and they're generally considered to be safe. There's not a whole lot of testing proving that they're safe or disproving that they're unsafe. It's just, well, they've been around for long enough, so they must be safe. Okay, it's occasionally things get removed from the GRAS list or added to the GRAS list. Okay, but there are a lot of additives, and I mentioned one in the previous lecture, which is things as simple as vitamin C. You can add that to sliced apples to help prevent oxidation or the browning of fruits and vegetables. But many of other ones are very highly chemical and far removed from foods, but the FDA has decided that they're safe. Nitrites are a type of additive that we find sometimes in foods like hot dogs and deli meats. They're added to meat and meat products to help preserve color. Okay, so they give you that traditional pink color of a hot dog. They also, in addition, are included, more so than to preserve the color, to inhibit the rancidity and thwart bacterial growth. In addition to putting a ton of salt in those foods, they help preserve the foods. However, in very high amounts, nitrites can be converted to what are called nitrosamines, and nitrosamines are carcinogenic. So we see higher rates of, for example, stomach cancer in people who eat a lot of cured meats, a lot of jerkies, a lot of sausages, a lot of hot dogs. They're also prevalent in beer and tobacco, so you see higher rates of stomach cancer in those groups as well. Sulfites, something you think of in context primarily of wine. In the United States, most wine is preserved using sulfites. Many beers are as well. These sulfites prevent the oxidation in foods, wine, and certain drugs. And for most people, they're perfectly fine. However, there are some people who are very severely allergic to sulfites. If you ever know anyone who has a sulfite allergy, they usually don't drink any beer or wine. You have to be really careful about sulfites are added to a lot of like cooked salads, cooked vegetable products. Interestingly, they also destroy the thiamine content of your foods. Okay, so if you're counting on sulfite-containing foods to supply you with your thiamine, you're kind of barking up the wrong tree there. MSG is something you probably heard about in regards to Asian food. Okay, MSG, monosodium glutamate, is a salt of the amino acid glutamic acid. It's used widely in restaurants, especially in Asian restaurants, okay, primarily because it enhances flavor and it provides this flavor profile known as umami. So if you know about the different taste profiles, there's sweet and salt and bitter. But umami is another one. It kind of described as the meatiness. So it gives a meatiness flavor to foods, in particular broths. It's used a lot in Vietnamese, Chinese, other broth-based dishes. For most people, it's just a lot of sodium. But for some people, they're particularly sensitive to it. And they have what's called MSG symptom complex. Okay, you sometimes hear that referred to as Asian restaurant syndrome. Okay, it makes them have kind of a dull level of nausea, big headaches. For some people, the symptoms are worse. Okay, in the U.S., it's determined that they're safe. MSG is safe to use in adult food, but it's actually prohibited in baby food because in some animal studies, it's been shown to cause brain damage. Okay, and the FDA says you have to disclose in your label the full name, monosodium glutamate, okay, because it's an additive, with the exception of meat. And you see this time and time again that meat and the meat lobby really exempted themselves from almost all the labeling laws. You go to buy a packet of ground beef, it doesn't have to have a nutrition facts panel on there. It doesn't have to tell you that the meat in here probably came from 1,000 different cows. It doesn't have to tell you if there's MSG added to it. The last one is BPA. I mentioned it. We used to rarely talk about BPA in the context of food. Okay, in the last couple of years, there's been some concerns regarding BPA and potential disease risk. Although you should know there's no established links, but there's enough concern, there's definitely enough consumer concern that the FDA recently banned BPA from baby bottles and sippy cups. So we're especially concerned about these additives with that magnetic effect in small children. Okay, so this is an additive that migrates its way into our foods and drinks from plastic-lined food cans, soda cans, baby formula containers, and certain clear, hard plastic water bottles. So now, for the most part, you see BPA-free plastic in products that are marketed directly to children, but also as an adult, you're advised to discard any scratched or hard plastic bottles, as these are known to harbor bacteria and to release BPA.